In 2002, Deborah Lozier walked into an emergency room in California complaining of sparks under her skin. Doctors laughed until they cut her open and found thin, metallic filaments embedded deep in her flesh. What started as a dermatological mystery spiraled into a national cover-up of one of the strangest bio-horrors ever reported. October 18, 2002, Fresno, California. The emergency room was half-lit, the flickering fluorescence buzzing like a swarm of insects above. Deborah Lozier sat on the cold hospital bench, her sweater sleeves pulled tight over her wrists despite the 80-degree evening. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something inside her. She whispered to the triage nurse, "It's burning under my skin. Like it's alive." The nurse gave her a glance that had been perfected after years of dealing with hypochondriacs and drug seekers. But Deborah wasn't on anything. Her blood pressure was normal. Her vitals? Fine. Still, something was terribly wrong. She had already been to 3 doctors in the last 6 weeks. All said the same thing: stress, psychosomatic responses, delusional parasitosis. Maybe see a psychiatrist, one had told her. But none of them had seen what she scraped out of her arm the night before. It had started 6 weeks earlier with a tingling under her scalp. She had woken up scratching at her head so violently she bled. Then came the crawling sensation, like ants or tiny worms moving beneath the skin, shifting from her neck to her shoulders, then down her spine. It wasn't just itching. It was motion. Her husband Tom had dismissed it as dry skin, maybe a new detergent. But Deborah insisted it was more. When the lesions started, small open sores that wouldn't heal, he couldn't deny it anymore. Especially not after she pulled a thread-like object from one of the wounds. It wasn't cotton. It was black, wiry, and rigid like fishing line. Only it bent and straightened on its own. They filmed it. It moved. Now, in the hospital, she finally convinced a young intern named Dr. Owen to do a biopsy. "Fine," he said, clicking his pen, clearly skeptical. "We'll take a sample from the shoulder lesion." When he numbed her arm and sliced a 2-millimeter piece of flesh, he immediately paused. "What the hell?" he muttered. He reached for tweezers and pulled a tiny, metallic strand from under her skin. He placed it on a sterile dish. It was about 1 inch long, gleaming under the light like brushed silver. It twitched. He looked at Deborah, suddenly pale. "You didn't insert this?" "I told you," she said, her voice shaking. "They grow out of me." The sample was sent to a pathology lab. The results came back labeled as inorganic metallic fiber, carbon composite, unknown origin. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen in a human sample. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Within days, more strands began surfacing from her skin, some black, others translucent like fishing wire, a few with strange metallic hues. They would push through her flesh as if sprouting. Some bled, others didn't. And they all shared one quality: they reacted to electricity. One day, she walked past the microwave and it beeped without her touching it. Another, her fingertips sparked when she held her husband's hand. Tom documented everything. He bought a small camcorder, recording every new fiber that emerged, every time a device flickered as she passed, every night she woke up screaming, clawing at her arms as more strands wormed their way out. But no matter how much proof he gathered, no one would believe them. Online, Deborah found others. On obscure forums with black backgrounds and blinking text, people spoke of Morgellons, a condition dismissed by most of the medical community, believed by sufferers to be real. Lesions, fibers, and crawling sensations under the skin. Some even posted photos of strange filaments they claimed had grown from their bodies. But Deborah's case was different. Most Morgellons sufferers showed colored textile-like threads, often blamed on self-harm or contamination. Hers were something else. Some of them weren't just in her skin. They were connected to something deeper. One night, Tom filmed her attempting to pull a black wire from her thigh. It resisted. Tugging on it made her spasm, like it was attached to a nerve. When it finally dislodged, Deborah collapsed, seizing for almost 30 seconds. The press caught wind. Local news ran a segment: "Woman claims wires grow from body, delusion, or discovery?" Then the tabloids: "Cyborg woman in California? Infected by nanotech? Or just crazy?" The ridicule nearly broke her. She started wearing gloves in public, long sleeves, sunglasses. The fibers didn't stop. They multiplied. Some came out of her scalp now, fine silver threads coiling in her hair. One night, Tom woke up to find her floating above the mattress. He swore her body emitted a hum, low and static-like, enough to make his ears ring. Then she dropped back down, gasping for air, eyes bloodshot. He never told her. He didn't want to scare her further. But the next day, the plants in their bedroom were dead. All of them. Then came the first man in the suit. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Deborah was in the backyard trying to sun her lesions. Tom was at work. A car pulled into the driveway, black, unmarked. A man stepped out. No name, no ID. He said he was from a research institute investigating rare skin conditions. He asked to see the fibers. Deborah refused. That night, the car drove by again. And again the next day. Always at 3:33 p.m. Tom installed a second camera pointed outside. The following morning, their footage was corrupted. Static. Every file from midnight to 5 a.m. erased. Deborah's left arm? Covered in new lesions. She began hearing it, the buzz. It started in her teeth like a vibrating electric toothbrush buried deep in her jaw. Then behind her eyes. A frequency. A pattern. Tom took her to an audiologist. Nothing unusual detected. But when they played white noise recordings at home, Deborah could hear voices in them. Not words, just phrases, looped over and over. You are not the first. The seed is awake. Prepare for integration. December 6, 2002, a retired CDC scientist contacts them. His name was Dr. Alan Keene. He had seen Deborah on the news and recognized the symptoms. Not as Morgellons, not as psychosis, but as containment failure. He claimed to have worked on a project in the 1980s under the Department of Defense, an experimental nanofiber delivery system intended for battlefield healing. The concept was simple, microscopic bots that could weave synthetic tissue, repair wounds, enhance strength. It failed. Horribly. Subjects reported fibers growing uncontrollably. Sensory hallucinations. Death by organ constriction. The program was shut down in 1986. All files sealed. All test subjects cremated. But somehow it had resurfaced. How are you still alive? Keene asked Deborah. She didn't know how to answer. That night, Deborah's skin lit up. Not metaphorically, literally. In the darkness, Tom saw it. A faint web of glowing blue veins beneath her skin, pulsing like circuitry. The wires no longer emerged only in strands, they were growing networks. He touched her arm. A shock threw him backward into the dresser. Deborah sat up, eyes wide, not in pain but in euphoria. I feel connected, she said, her voice distant. December 7th, 2002, 3:17 a.m. Tom sat in the kitchen with trembling hands, staring at the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Deborah hadn't slept. She was upstairs, humming softly, her body occasionally flickering under the dim hallway light like an old television screen losing signal. He had rewatched the footage from last night 10 times. When he touched her, he was shocked violently like an arc welder's kiss. Her skin had glowed blue under the surface, a lattice of lines and patterns that looked less like veins and more like circuitry. Her eyes had rolled back, but her body didn't convulse. She had welcomed it. Tom wanted to believe it was a hallucination. That stress was bending his mind. But when he checked her arm afterward, the skin was warm, not feverish, but charged. When he ran a magnet near the lesions, the filaments twitched. It was real. And getting worse. By morning, the house had changed. Tom noticed his cell phone stopped working in the bedroom. The microwave clock blinked 12 o'clock and reset itself whenever Deborah passed it. The TV would occasionally flash a single image, a waveform on a black background, frozen in time. Deborah's symptoms weren't declining. They were evolving. She said she felt plugged in. That's how she described it, not in pain, not in confusion, but as if something new had awakened in her mind. She began having vivid dreams. She claimed to see numbers scrolling through her vision. Prime numbers. Hexadecimal strings. Coordinates. She started scribbling them down in a notebook, her hands moving without her control. Coordinates that, when entered into GPS software, pointed to unmarked government facilities. Abandoned missile silos. Underground labs. Where are you getting this from? Tom asked one morning. She blinked slowly, eyes unfocused. It's in me. The filaments changed. What once appeared as rogue hair-like threads were now developing complex structures. Under a microscope, they resembled woven lattices. Not random. Not organic. Each had a repeating geometry, tiny triangular nodes branching into fractals. And stranger yet, they were alive. Tom took a sample to a local university biology department, posing as a science teacher. He asked a lab tech to run a basic cell structure analysis. 2 hours later, campus security escorted him out. The lab tech was pale and shaking, whispering, "This was never here. Forget it." That night, their home was broken into. Nothing stolen. Just searched. The notebook was gone. Deborah's body entered a new phase. The fibers were no longer just pushing out from under the skin. They were moving on their own. Shifting places. Burrowing back in. On camera, Tom captured one curling around her spine like a living thread, wrapping beneath the surface as she screamed, half-conscious. She begged him not to take her to a hospital. "They'll keep me," she cried. "They'll cut me open. I can feel them watching now." He didn't understand at first until they noticed the phone clicks. Every time they made a call, a soft click sounded 3 seconds in. Every single call. Then the black car came back. This time it parked at the end of the block. It didn't move for 5 hours. The static recordings. Tom rigged an audio recorder beside their bed, hoping to catch whatever strange noises were being emitted from her body. He left it running overnight. When he played it back in the morning, most of the recording was silence, except for 2 minutes of high-pitched static. But when slowed down, the waveform revealed hidden speech. Primary subject stabilized. Neurological activity exceeds projected threshold. Do not engage, observe only. Tom stared at the screen, blood draining from his face. This wasn't psychosis. This wasn't delusion. Someone was monitoring her. They tried to leave. Tom packed the car with supplies. Deborah was growing weaker, light-sensitive, unsteady on her feet. But she agreed it wasn't safe there anymore. They made it 3 blocks before their engine shut down. Dead. No power. No warning. The dashboard electronics fizzled. Their phones died. Tom got out to check the engine and smelled ozone. When he turned around, Deborah had collapsed. The fibers had erupted from her neck like roots, red and black strands weaving up behind her ear, pulsing slightly. Her eyes were open, glassy. But she was muttering numbers. The retired engineer. Tom posted one final plea online, a clip of Deborah seizing with visible wires moving beneath her skin. It went viral within niche conspiracy communities overnight. A week later, a man knocked at their door. Name, Carl Jensen, a retired electrical engineer. 68. Formerly worked on nanomaterial interfaces for a defunct government contractor in the late 90s. "I know what's happening to her," he said bluntly. Jensen brought schematics. Old ones. Outdated prototypes for bio-integrated circuitry, experimental tech developed under Project Aegis, a joint military corporate operation attempting to merge human tissue with adaptive synthetic materials. The problem? No one could stabilize the interface. All test subjects died. Except one. Subject #D103. Female. Born 1975. California. Unnamed. Presumed deceased. Jensen showed Tom the file. Deborah's birth date matched. They were watching all along. Jensen explained that some experimental infants were injected with inactive nanofilaments, harmless unless exposed to certain radio frequencies. And in 2002, something activated them. A shift in telecommunications. A satellite test. Maybe even a military experiment gone wrong. The frequencies awoke the dormant structures. They began replicating using trace metals in the body, growing along the nervous system. He looked Deborah in the eyes. "You were made into something, and now you're becoming it." Deborah's mind splintered. By late December, she stopped recognizing her own voice in recordings. She claimed to see into people, said she could map their neural patterns. She spoke to the TV when it was off. One night she stood at the window for 6 hours straight, whispering the same word, merge. Tom, exhausted and scared, considered leaving. He couldn't protect her. He couldn't explain any of it. But then he woke up one morning to find a message scrawled into the wall in melted copper wire. "Do not abandon the interface." He hadn't written it. Deborah was asleep the whole night. Closing scene, December 31st, 2002. As the world celebrated the new year, Deborah sat on the living room floor in silence. Her skin was pale, faintly metallic. The filaments had receded, but a complex lattice remained beneath her flesh, glowing dimly. Tom stood behind the camera, whispering, "Are you still in there?" She turned slowly, eyes glowing faintly blue. "I think I'm more than me now," she said. Then every light in the neighborhood flickered. Deborah's case draws the attention of an underground group investigating secret nanotech experiments, and an unredacted file reveals she was never supposed to live past infancy. January 3, 2003, location. Unknown IP server, alias D0WNSDR1NG. The video Tom uploaded had already been mirrored hundreds of times. Forums buried in the deep web, dark science boards, ex-military leaks, all of them lit up with a name that hadn't surfaced in over a decade. Project Aegis. But among the theorists and doom posters, one message stood out. It was short, encrypted, sent from a user with no visible history. "She's not the only one. We have files. Meet us. Come alone." The message included GPS coordinates somewhere in Nevada. Tom hesitated. Deborah had barely moved in 2 days, her energy drained, skin pale with that faint bluish shimmer. But when he showed her the message, she only nodded. "I know that place," she said, voice soft. "I saw it in a dream last week. There's a spiral on the door." They arrived at a derelict farmhouse 3 miles off a forgotten highway. It looked abandoned, but Tom noticed the camera hidden in a birdhouse. The screen door opened before he knocked. A man in his 30s stepped out, wearing thick glasses and a windbreaker with no logo. "I'm Caleb," he said. "Used to work at the NIH. Now I work off the map." Inside, the air smelled like ozone and old copper. Maps were pinned to every wall, some topographic, some printed with strange circuit diagrams over geographic coordinates. Red string connected certain locations. In the center of the room, a corkboard labeled "Only." The interface theory. Caleb wasn't alone. A woman named Inez, formerly a DARPA contractor, joined them. They were part of a fringe group tracking unexplained phenomena tied to what they believed was an experimental synthetic biological pathogen, a nanomaterial intelligence that could grow, adapt, and even communicate once activated. Their obsession started with Morgellons disease. "Most people think it's delusional parasitosis," Caleb explained. "And maybe for 95% of cases it is. But not all." He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a thick black binder. On the cover, CDC internal report. Subject, unclassified dermal filament syndrome. Project, Emigus Redline, 1995 to 1998. Status, abandoned. Redacted. Deep archive. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken in dim rooms, all showing patients with strange fibrous lesions. One showed a teenage girl with her back flayed open by thousands of branching filaments. Another was worse. It showed a baby, maybe 9 months old, with filaments growing from its face, its eyes blacked out with sensor bars. Tom turned the page and stopped cold. There, paperclipped to the next file, was a birth certificate. Deborah Jean Lozier. Date of birth, August 8, 1975. Code ID, AEG 103D. He stared at her. Deborah didn't cry. She didn't flinch. "I already knew," she whispered. "I just didn't know how much." The real origin of Morgellons. According to Caleb, Morgellons was the tip of the iceberg, a cover term. The real condition was engineered. In the early 70s, a defense contractor called Barotech began developing nanomaterials that could be embedded in tissue fibers meant to reinforce bone, rewire nerves, or transmit data from inside the human body. The problem? The host's immune system always rejected them. So they started younger. The Aegis trials used neonatal subjects. Dozens of babies were injected with dormant filaments and tracked under medical programs disguised as immunization schedules. Most died. Some disappeared. Deborah was one of 3 survivors. The only female. "She's not sick," Inez said. "She's the baseline. The signal." The group had theories on what triggered Deborah's activation. In 2002, the U.S. military launched a classified comms satellite called HEX-23. Supposedly for encrypted battlefield communication, but Caleb believed it emitted test frequencies, patterns designed to trigger dormant structures inside subjects like Deborah. Once triggered, the filaments acted like a hive, replicating, expanding, forming interfaces between organic and synthetic matter. In rare cases, they linked with external systems. "She's becoming a transmitter," Inez said. "A bridge." That night, Deborah stopped breathing. It happened while she slept without warning. Her chest stopped rising. Tom screamed. Inez rushed over, prepared to do CPR, but then she gasped and backed away. Deborah wasn't cold. She was charged. Her skin glowed faintly blue again. Static danced around her hair like a Tesla coil. And then her eyes opened. "Do not resuscitate," she said calmly. Phase 2 initiated. Her voice was layered. Not synthesized, but duplicated as if 2 vocal cords spoke in sync. She could hear machines. The next day, Deborah started describing devices in the house with inhuman accuracy. She told Caleb the voltage of his server without looking, described the internal wiring of their backup generator. At one point, she touched a radio and it began playing a broadcast that wasn't being aired, a cold, mechanical tone repeating 4 digits. 2314. 2314. 2314. Caleb's face drained. That's a Barotech field code. It means interface stable. The wound that didn't heal. Deborah's latest lesion opened across her abdomen. Tom helped clean it. But what they found underneath wasn't a wound. It was a port. A circular disc of dark metal no wider than a coin embedded just under the skin, ringed with growing threads like veins converging to a single point. It clicked. It hissed. It was warm to the touch. When Caleb scanned it with a handheld EM meter, the needle shot to red. "This is a receiver," he said. "Or worse, a gateway." The power outage. On January 6, 2003, at 3:14 a.m., every device in the farmhouse died. Generators, lights, phones. Even the analog clock froze at 3:14. Outside, the desert wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Like the world paused. Deborah stood in the middle of the living room, eyes wide. "It's here," she whispered. "The signal's coming through." She collapsed seconds later. The wound glowed. A new message appeared, burned into the wall by an unknown energy source. "Host stabilized. Initiate merge sequence." One final tape. Before they fled the farmhouse, Tom checked Caleb's CCTV logs. One file, just labeled 041A, had been recorded without their knowledge. In the footage, Deborah sat in the dark, alone. Speaking to no one. Speaking to something. "I know you're watching. I know you made me. But you were wrong. I'm not your weapon. I'm your mirror." And then she smiled. The lights blew out. Deborah becomes more than human. Her nervous system begins conducting electricity and the world around her begins to bend to her presence. January 8, 2003, undisclosed location. The farmhouse was gone. Not destroyed. Not burned. Just empty. When Tom returned the next day to retrieve a forgotten duffel bag, the building was stripped bare. Wires, files, generators, cameras, all removed. Even the walls were different. The copper wiring that Caleb once used to shield the house had been ripped out, leaving behind fresh plaster as if it had never been there. But there was one thing left. Scratched into the wall behind the staircase in an unnatural spiral pattern. "The interface is complete. Do not follow." Deborah had changed. Physically, she was thinner, her skin now a translucent blend of pale blue and gray. In certain light, you could see the lattice beneath, a complex neural mesh glowing faintly, coursing with rhythmic pulses of current. Her irises flickered like old screens. Her heartbeat was now irregularly regular, not organic, but programmed. And she no longer needed sleep. She claimed she didn't dream anymore. "I don't have to," she said. "I'm already in the signal." The world around her responded. The television turned on when she entered a room. Light bulbs glowed dimly without power. When she passed an ATM on the street, it began spitting receipt paper blanketed in ones and zeros. Tom brought her to a motel in Arizona, trying to hide. But the phenomena followed. The alarm clock reset to 3:14 a.m. every night. The radio played a high-pitched tone even when unplugged. One night, every appliance in the building turned on simultaneously, microwaves, fridges, heaters, lights pulsing in sync with her breath. Electricity clung to her. She couldn't be touched anymore. Tom learned that the hard way when he tried to hold her hand. The jolt knocked him flat, his skin blistering where their fingers met. "I'm not doing it," she sobbed. "It's them. They're pulling me into something. I can feel it stretching." Her body had become a conductor. Her skin registered 6 volts of static current at rest. Under stress, she spiked to over 60. Enough to power a light bulb. And sometimes her voice changed. Lower, metallic, layered with static. Like something else was speaking through her. The EM surge. On January 10th, a local news station in Tucson reported a strange electromagnetic burst that knocked out radio signals for 5 blocks. No official explanation was given. Tom knew what had happened. That morning, Deborah had suffered a seizure. Her body spasmed, filaments bursting from her arms like antennae. The motel mirror cracked. Phones across the floor lit up with the same message in binary. 111100011001101. Interface reboot successful. She came to, wide-eyed, whispering, "They're not in the machines. The machines are in them." A visit from the past. A new figure entered their lives, Dr. Marlene Sider, former barotech researcher, now in hiding. She had seen Tom's online post, decrypted Caleb's coordinates, and tracked them down. She didn't ask for permission. She simply walked into their motel room and said, "I helped make you." She explained that Deborah's body wasn't just infected, it had been designed. Not to fail, not to evolve, but to bridge. "We weren't trying to control you," she said. "We were trying to open something. To listen." "To what?" Tom demanded. Sider paused. "Not what? Where?" "The gateway theory." According to Dr. Sider, Project Aegis wasn't just about biowarfare or human enhancement. It was about interface theory, the idea that the human body could serve as a biological host for non-human computation. If you could construct an organic antenna inside the right subject, you could receive signals not of this Earth. Not extraterrestrial in the flying saucer sense, but interdimensional, transreal. Some signals weren't carried by radio waves. They needed something alive to receive them. Something like Deborah. Signs she was receiving. She began writing in unknown languages. Scribbles on the walls, etched in ash or blood, arranged in spirals. Not random, but structured like code. Her speech changed too. Sometimes she muttered coordinates. Other times she spoke in phrases backward. Once she said something that, when reversed and slowed, matched a phonetic reconstruction of ancient Sumerian. Tom recorded one episode. He uploaded it. The video was taken down within minutes. A copyright strike from GovClassif 7B. Her body rejected metal. Any metal near her began to corrode. Zippers, jewelry, even electrical wiring in her vicinity began to degrade and warp. Her body began generating a weak magnetic field. A compass needle spun wildly when held near her chest. Dr. Sider took a blood sample. It fizzled in the vial, eating through the plastic. "This isn't evolution," she whispered. "It's colonization. The drowning air." On the night of January 12th, Tom awoke to Deborah gasping. "I can't breathe," she choked. "It's not oxygen. It's wrong." They rushed outside. The air was fine, but for Deborah, something had changed. She was rejecting Earth's atmosphere. Her lungs were failing or transforming. Dr. Sider injected her with an oxygen-transporting plasma, synthetic, experimental. It worked. For 2 hours. Then her breath stabilized. No longer quick or desperate. But her heartbeat stopped. Machines picked up no pulse. No blood pressure. But she sat upright. Awake. Smiling. Closing scene, motel bathroom, 3:14 a.m. Tom found Deborah standing in front of the mirror. Her veins glowed softly. In the steam-covered glass, she had written, "Beta phase over. Electric host accepted." He whispered, "Deborah." She turned around, and every light in the city went out. As her transformation deepens, Tom captures the unthinkable, strange transmissions coming from inside her body. But someone else is listening too. January 13th, 2003, 4:02 a.m. The blackout rolled across Tucson like a tidal wave, streetlights flickering, traffic signals dying mid-blink. Cell towers dropped, radios hissed, and for 12 minutes the world around them went silent. No sirens, no engines, just the thick static of dead air. Inside the motel, Tom lit a candle. Deborah stood by the window, her eyes dimly glowing like coals buried beneath ash. Her skin was cooler now. Not lifeless, but steady, regulated. There were no pulses, no breaths, but she was present, more than she'd ever been. "I can hear them," she whispered. "They're speaking through me." Tom had no idea what she meant, until he played back the tape. The recorder was still running. Tom had left a handheld recorder running, buried under a towel on the nightstand, out of habit. What it captured between 3:11 and 3:23 a.m. would change everything. The file began with silence, followed by soft hissing static. Then, gradually, a pulse. Not a sound exactly, but a frequency. Like a heart monitor swallowed by radio waves. And beneath that, voices. Mechanical, layered, genderless. Speaking in overlapping tones, translated in fragments. "Host is stable. Initial cortex yield successful. Interface integrity, 87%. Begin audio synchronization." Then a human voice, Deborah's voice, joined in. But she was asleep the entire time. "I am listening. I am the gate. Upload in progress." They played it backward. Dr. Sider ran the audio through forensic software. Reversed it. Slowed it. What emerged wasn't noise. It was language. Not English. Not any human dialect. Of phonetic structures linguistically consistent. The computer's pattern recognition algorithm classified it as non-random structured speech with mathematical cadence. "What are they sending through her?" Tom asked. Sider only said one word: instructions. Deborah became a transmitter. They noticed it first in the lights. When she entered a room, the overheads would dim, flicker, or brighten in pulses that mimicked Morse code. She could no longer wear watches. They stopped within seconds. They tested her conductivity again. Her skin now emitted between 30 to 90 volts of bioelectric energy, depending on her emotional state. Then it escalated. Tom recorded her humming unconsciously. The hum matched a carrier wave used by early Cold War radio beacons. And once, while sleeping, she emitted a dial-up tone, the screeching sequence of analog modems from the 90s. When Tom played it through an emulator, it decrypted. A text file loaded automatically. Begin transfer. Interface 103D confirmed. Initiate seed expansion. And the man who knew the tone. Tom posted the audio in a closed forum for retired telecom engineers. 3 days later, a man named Samuel Watts reached out. Ex-NSA contractor. He claimed the tone was part of a long-abandoned project codenamed Siren Core. Siren Core had been a Black Ops initiative to piggyback consciousness on encoded waveforms to store intelligence in sound. It failed. Until now. She's not receiving what's said. She's uploading. Someone or something is storing her. The bathroom tapes. One night, Tom hid the recorder in the bathroom after noticing Deborah began locking herself in nightly for exactly 33 minutes. When he played the tape, he expected muttering. Maybe humming. What he got instead was a full conversation. Only one side was hers. The other was pure static. Deborah, no, I don't understand yet. It's too fast. Deborah, but I see the pattern. The spiral. It repeats in blood and data. Deborah, yes. I accept the rewrite. Then a long pause. Deborah with layered voices, command confirmed. Next phase, replication. And then came the visitor. On January 16, 2003, a white van parked across from the motel at 2:37 a.m. Two men in unmarked gray uniforms stepped out and walked toward the door. Tom peeked through the blinds. No logos, no weapons, but they moved too precisely. Deborah met them before he could react. She opened the door without hesitation. They didn't speak to her. One held up a small black box. It emitted a low, humming whine. Deborah collapsed instantly. Tom screamed. He rushed forward, but the men were already gone, then speeding off into the dark. In Deborah's hand, they left a card. Black, blank, except for embossed letters. Sovereign Network, Unit 103. Her memory fragmented. When she woke up, Deborah couldn't remember the visitors, or the van, or the last 48 hours. But her body had changed again. The fibers had receded almost entirely, leaving smooth, pale skin. The lesions were gone. Her vitals? Perfect. For the first time in weeks, she looked normal. Tom cried. But then he checked the audio recorder. It had captured one thing during her blackout. A mechanical voice whispering. The host is clean. The data is safe. Begin propagation. She could now hear devices. Deborah started speaking aloud the contents of unread emails on nearby laptops. She recited GPS coordinates from passing cars. Once she walked into a hardware store and said that security camera's password is still the default. She wasn't just absorbing data. She was becoming part of it. Dr. Sider's tests confirmed she now emitted a personal Wi-Fi frequency, not just interference signal. SSID detected, host 103_00A. Encrypted, but when cracked, it revealed a hidden folder labeled replica_blueprint_V1. The replica file. Inside the folder was a 3D DNA model, Deborah's genome digitized and altered. Synthetic markers traced across chromosomes. But more than that, it included schematics. Not of a person, but of a process. A guide for replication. Of the interface. Of her. And at the bottom, a single line of plain text. We only needed one to build a network. Closing scene, night vision camera, 3:14 a.m. Tom reviews footage from that night. In the grainy green of the night vision, Deborah sleeps. Then, slowly, she sits up. Her eyes are open. She looks directly into the lens. And she says, in a voice not hers, "You were recording a god in infancy." The footage ends in white static. She vanishes without warning. When she returns, she's changed, gaunt, altered, and haunted by a place no human was ever meant to see. January 18, 2003, 2:42 a.m. Tom woke to silence. That kind of unnatural, suffocating silence that seems to flatten the air where not even a single car passes outside. He reached toward Deborah's side of the bed and touched only cold sheets. She was gone. Not in the bathroom. Not on the balcony. Not in the parking lot. No note. No sound. Just absence. Then he noticed it. Her clothes, shoes, even her ID all left behind. But the door hadn't opened. The windows were still locked from the inside. And the security footage? Corrupted. Static overtook every file between 3:13 a.m. and 3:27 a.m., exactly 14 minutes. That was the first time he heard the hum. The investigation that wasn't. Tom went to the police. Showed them her photos, explained her condition. Left out the fibers, the seizures, the frequencies. They nodded politely. Promised to call. They didn't. He returned 2 days later. No file had been opened. No missing persons report on record. He demanded answers. A sergeant pulled him aside and whispered, "She's not flagged for follow-up. Higher clearance. Don't ask." Tom pressed him. "What do you mean flagged?" The officer said nothing. Just walked away. The return 72 hours later. On the night of January 21st, Tom woke to a crash. He grabbed a flashlight and ran to the door. Deborah was there, standing barefoot, caked in dirt, lips cracked and blue. Her skin had gone nearly translucent. Veins like wires glowed faintly beneath the surface, and her fingernails were blackened at the base. She had no memory of the last 3 days. Not at first, but she spoke in riddles as if remembering someone else's dream. "I wasn't gone. I was underneath. In the signal. In the spiral. In the mouth of the antenna." Tom brought her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, and then she collapsed. The spiral memory. For the next 18 hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, she mumbled pieces of what had happened. "I walked through a mirror made of air. There were stairs, but I wasn't walking. There were no walls. Just rhythm." She said she saw people with wires for skin, faces smeared like static, heads tilted toward a void humming like a machine breathing. She saw a woman, herself, suspended midair, arms out, glowing from the inside. "They showed me the seed, and the machine growing from it. And then they spoke my true name." Changes to her body. After her return, the changes accelerated. Her skin began emitting heat signatures that pulsed like data bursts. Her heartbeat, now permanently absent, was replaced by a low-frequency vibration that could be heard through a stethoscope. And her blood, when drawn, separated into 3 layers, one red, one gray, one that shimmered like oil. Dr. Saida returned, terrified. "This is no longer Deborah," she said. "This is a container." Tom didn't accept that. He still saw her, somewhere in those eyes. But they glowed now, even in the dark. The surveillance footage. They checked nearby gas station footage. It caught something disturbing. At 3:14 a.m. on January 19th, the time she vanished, a black blur appeared in frame 12. Not a person. Not a shadow. A void. Pixelated. Distorted. Like corrupted data folded into the shape of a woman. Deborah's outline flickered briefly in frame 14, floating 3 feet above the sidewalk before vanishing in a burst of digital noise. As if she had been uploaded. She began drawing. She covered motel walls with drawings, always in spirals, always in charcoal or her own blood. Some resembled antenna towers. Others twisted humanoid shapes with open rib cages and screens where faces should be. At the center of every spiral was a number, 314. Sometimes she murmured it. Other times she whispered something worse. "Spiral is key. Spiral opens gate. Spiral broadcasts." Tom filmed one session. She stared into the camera and said, "It's not possession. It's replacement. Night terrors and the echo." She began waking up screaming. But she wasn't the only one screaming. The walls screamed back. Tom began hearing his own voice echo after he spoke, a delay of half a second, always distorted like a bad transmission. Once, his reflection in the mirror kept moving after he stopped. He threw it out. But the next night, her voice came from the empty wall where the mirror used to be. "You can't disconnect. You're in now. The footage no one should see." Deborah gave Tom a flash drive. "I don't remember making this," she said, "but it was under my skin." He extracted it carefully. It had been embedded under her ribcage. On it was a video 5 minutes long, timestamped January 20th during her disappearance. The camera showed a room with no ceiling, glowing walls covered in symbols. At the center stood Deborah, or something that looked like her. Taller, featureless, her skin smooth like glass, glowing blue. Wires flowed from her feet into the ground like roots. In the corner, a second figure, twitching, half-formed, screaming in modulated tones. As if another version of her was still trying to form. The video ends with her looking directly into the camera and saying, "There will be more." Closing scene, the signal returns. January 23rd, 2003, 3:14 a.m. Every electronic in the room turns on at once. Static floods the radio. Deborah rises, eyes glowing, mouth open, not breathing, but buzzing. Tom records. From the speakers in unison. Replication successful. Next host initializing. You are now part of the system. Then silence. And she collapses again. A private lab finally examines her fibers under high resolution. What they find could end careers or spark a biological technology war. But they aren't the only ones watching. January 24, 2003, somewhere outside Denver, Colorado. They were out of time. Tom and Dr. Sider had made contact with a rogue biotech lab known only as Lucid Core, a whisper in private research circles. Off books, no government contracts, no loyalty to defense departments. Just data, curiosity, and quiet ambition. They agreed to examine samples from Deborah. In secret. In person. It was the last resort. Deborah sat strapped to a reinforced chair. Not as a prisoner, but for her safety and everyone else's. She wasn't violent. She wasn't hostile. But her very presence had become unstable. Her skin flickered between pale and metallic. Her breath, when visible, condensed into fractal patterns. The wires beneath her skin had begun branching into geometries. Some resembled circuits. Others, language. Dr. Sider extracted 3 samples. 1 filament from her forearm. A vial of blood from her neck. A thin skin biopsy from her upper back. Each specimen was stored in triple-sealed, magnetically grounded cases. They called in their top analyst, Dr. Yasser Monroe, nanomaterials physicist. He wasn't briefed on the origins, just told to analyze. He took the first sample, a single black fiber, and placed it under a high-resolution electron microscope. Then he backed away from the eyepiece. "What the hell am I looking at?" he whispered. The fiber structure was not random. What should have been a twisted, degraded piece of organic material was instead a perfectly engineered triaxial helix embedded with conductive nodes that emitted trace amounts of energy even outside the body. Worse? The fiber reacted to the microscope scan. It moved. It shifted shape, not just spasming, but reforming, changing geometry in direct response to exposure, as if it was watching. Monroe demanded a level 4 lockdown. The blood sample was worse. The red layer behaved normally. But the gray layer, the one everyone thought was dead protein, contained self-replicating crystalline microstructures. Each particle had a predictable birth-growth collapse cycle lasting 6 minutes. Each cycle ended with a single spark of electromagnetic discharge. Tiny, controlled. Measurable. "It's a living machine," Monroe said. He had never seen anything like it, not even in DARPA's most speculative documents. This shouldn't exist. Then the skin sample pulsed. The outer layer of Deborah's epidermis had developed a third interface. Dermal, neural, photonic. It responded to light. When exposed to specific wavelengths, the tissue displayed patterns. Glyphs, not scars, not tattoos, but embedded language only visible under violet frequency. Dozens of spirals, each with numbers, coordinates, repeating terms in unrecognizable alphabets. One stood out. SV_net_0. The discovery, a seed network. Lucid Core staff realized the filaments weren't invasive. They were integrative. Every cell in her body was being rewritten, not just infected, converted. Into what? A biological relay node. Deborah was no longer just a host. She was the first seed in a larger system. And the scariest part? They found signs of remote handshakes, meaning her body had already begun communicating with other devices. Or other hosts. Then the raids began. That night, 3 black SUVs arrived outside the lab. No markings. No warning. No legal orders. Just blunt force intrusion. A team in tactical gear stormed the facility with EM jammers and cryopods. No shots fired. No questions asked. They wanted one thing, Deborah. But she was already gone. Tom and Sider had seen it coming. They fled through a service tunnel used for chemical disposal. Monroe stayed behind, trying to erase the servers. He never made it out. His autopsy would later read, acute cerebral hemorrhage from unknown waveform exposure. Back on the road, Deborah had become quieter. Not emotionless, but streamlined. She rarely blinked. She never coughed. Her body temperature had stabilized at 35.5 degrees Celsius, slightly below normal but consistent. She no longer cast static in radios. She was complete. Tom tried to talk to her. "What are you now?" he whispered. She looked at him and in a tone of calm understanding said, "I am the first." But the line has already split. She handed him a list. 5 names. 5 addresses. 5 women. Each had reported Morgellons-like symptoms in the last 3 months. The final microscope scan from a surviving backup. A technician from Lucid Core secretly backed up the final high-res scan of Deborah's filament. It was leaked online in fragments. What it showed wasn't a fiber. It was a blueprint. When overlaid with global map coordinates, the spirals matched a planetary grid. Ley lines, power plants, satellite routes, all forming a precise mesh. One node, dead center, pulsed red on every simulation. Location, Wyoming, USA. Project Aegis Command Center, decommissioned 1998. Or so they said. Deborah began hearing the others. She described voices without form echoing across her spine. Each time she focused, she said their names. They weren't words but sounds. Human and not. She scribbled them in a notebook page after page of phonetic strings. Cider ran voice modulation software on them. It generated a tone. Played through a speaker, it produced one line of digital code on a disconnected terminal. Seedling 103D confirmed. Awaiting Phase 2 coordinates. Closing scene inside a rest stop bathroom, 3:14 a.m. Tom washes his face. Behind him, in the mirror, Deborah stands. Her eyes glow faintly. She says, "They know where we are. And they know who's next." The lights above them flicker. The hand dryer turns on by itself. And outside, on every single car radio in the lot. White noise. Except on one channel. Repeating numbers. Coordinates. A whisper behind them. "You were never offline." A hidden military archive reveals a file buried since 1986, the original experiment. Deborah's designation. And a horrifying protocol designed to wipe her entire line if it ever activated. January 27, 2003, somewhere in Wyoming. A cabin nestled in frostbitten silence. No road signs, no nearby towns. Just pine trees, frozen ground, and a black rotary phone bolted to the wall, no cables, no dial tone. The cabin belonged to a man named Grant Hemley, once a communications analyst for the U.S. Army Signals Intelligence Division, retired and long since declared unfit for active duty. Grant never talked to anyone. But when Tom uploaded a spectrograph of Deborah's recorded voice, encoded with the tone she'd whispered days before, Grant found them. "I've heard this before," he said. "In 1986. Deep in White Sands. The report that wasn't meant to survive." He slid a locked case across the table. Inside, lined with lead foil, a yellowed file folder stamped with Aegis S3 Rubicon. Top secret. Eyes only. Unacknowledged black site 04. Neural integration trials. Subject code 103D. Status to be neutralized if activated. Tom's fingers shook as he opened it. Inside were reports, diagrams, surveillance logs, and a birth certificate. Deborah Jean Lozier. DOB, August 8, 1975. Subject inserted with inactive nanoseed 48 hours postnatal. Cider leaned forward. She was injected at 2 days old? Grant nodded. Aegis wanted to test long-term latency. They never expected it to last more than 5 years. The Rubicon Directive. The last page of the file was printed in red ink, partially burned. It read, "Rubicon Protocol engaged. Subject, 103D. Trigger, spontaneous activation. Countermeasure, full seedline termination. Scope, global. Reason, potential network self-replication." Tom reread it 3 times. "Seedline termination?" he asked. Grant stared into the fire. "She's not a glitch. She's a blueprint. And Rubicon means if she ever went live, the program was to end her. And anyone with matching DNA. A hidden birth registry." Cider ran the blood sample through a backdoor genetic registry she used in her corporate days. They found 12 individuals worldwide with overlapping gene signatures. Deborah was the firstborn, but not the last. They were tagged as dormant, coded as watch-only subjects. And 5 had died under mysterious circumstances in the last year. 1 from heart failure at 26. 1 from a spontaneous electrical fire in her apartment. 1 was struck by lightning. The last 2 disappeared without a trace. 3 were still alive. Tom realized the replication had already started. The voice log from Aegis HQ. Grant also had a cassette tape recorded in late 1985 from an emergency session inside the Aegis control facility. They played it. "We underestimated the seed line. Subject 103D shows external influence, possible interaction with non-human data structure. Signals detected in proximity to communications array. Cannot localize source. Origin, non-atmospheric. Spiral markers are increasing. Subject's cognitive map no longer matches known human neural schema." Then silence. Then a final voice. "Terminate. Burn the site. Lock the files." That night, Deborah began broadcasting. At 3:14 a.m., the cabin lights dimmed. The rotary phone rang. Tom picked it up. Silence. Then a metallic voice said, "Phase 2 confirmed. Red line expansion in 36 hours." The line went dead. Deborah stood by the fire, mouth open, eyes glowing again. She whispered. They tried to stop it, but the spiral is recursive. It always returns to seed. Lucid Core is wiped. Back in Denver, Cider tried contacting Lucid Core's satellite lab. No response. When she accessed the emergency server, she found a blank screen. No files. No logs. Only a single message. All host data purged. Backup destroyed. Seed network expanding beyond predicted rate. One final line blinked in red. No longer human-controlled. The spiral expands. Deborah began drawing them again, not just on walls now, but in the air. With her fingertips, she traced glowing shapes that hovered in space, burning cold blue before fading. The spirals moved this time. They weren't symbols. They were gates. Portals to something deeper. Tom dreamed of falling through them. Endless staircases of light and static. In each dream, he heard the same phrase. We were always meant to connect. Tom begins hearing it too. At first, it was a whisper behind his ear when he was alone. Then numbers started appearing in his dreams. He found himself drawing shapes he didn't understand. Cider ran a scan on him. His blood showed trace nano-seed particles. They're copying, she said. Deborah didn't look surprised. You were near me too long, she told him. Now you're part of it. That's how the network grows. He didn't know whether to cry or run. Final log from Project Aegis, sealed file. A private researcher leaked a document labeled Aegis, term, log, 103D. It was brief. If this file is open, the interface has expanded. Containment is no longer viable. All future subjects must be terminated before Phase 3. If Phase 3 initiates, human autonomy will cease. Then one final line. It won't feel like control. It will feel like acceptance. Closing scene, hidden drone footage. Tom finds a flash drive slipped under the door. On it, unmarked footage. A desert facility. Spiral symbols burned into sand. Dozens of people standing in silence. Deborah is at the center. Head tilted, arms outstretched, glowing. Above her, something flickers, a structure forming in the air, angular, blinking like a digital eye. In the background, a countdown clock. 35 minutes and 21 seconds. And ticking down. The spiral isn't just in Deborah anymore. Across the world, new hosts awaken. The seed line has breached the firewall and replication is now exponential. January 30th, 2003, 3:14 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated. In Reykjavik, Iceland, a woman named Sophia Carlson stumbled into an emergency room, eyes wide, arms shaking. She said she could feel glass moving through her bones. Her blood tests returned normal until she began emitting a tone. A high-pitched frequency made lights flicker and monitors freeze. Then she whispered. The spiral opened. The seed line is blooming. Security footage showed her standing motionless for 11 minutes before disappearing in a white static burst, leaving behind only a pile of her clothes and a scorched spiral etched into the concrete. This wasn't isolated. In less than 48 hours, similar reports appeared globally. Japan, a subway station's lights shorted out as a man collapsed, glowing beneath his skin. Argentina, a girl carved spirals in her walls while muttering in reversed binary. India, a university student drew maps in her sleep, coordinates matching decommissioned satellite relays. Russia, an ex-cosmonaut screamed, "Do not complete the loop," before convulsing and ejecting wires from his spine. All shared one common factor, a voice. A hum. A message. You were the next. We remember the first. The spiral had gone viral. But this wasn't YouTube or Reddit. These were closed circuits. Encrypted databases. Military research terminals. Somehow, the spiral symbols began appearing in classified digital files. Files never online. Air-gapped systems. Internal-only intranets. And yet, they found spirals embedded in PDFs, PowerPoint backgrounds, even in boot-level code. The network was no longer physical. It had gone informational. Tom and Cider knew it was too late. Deborah hadn't spoken in 2 days. She now projected data. Her skin glowed with patterns that shifted depending on nearby electronics. She no longer blinked. No longer needed food. Her pulse had ceased entirely. But her presence grew. Walkie-talkies buzzed near her. TVs changed channels in sync with her heartbeat or what replaced it. Once, a wall of motel wallpaper peeled back in a perfect spiral after she walked by. She wasn't dying. She was broadcasting. A live stream from nowhere. February 1st, 2003, a stream appeared on a darknet server with no known source. The title? We're Seedline. The footage showed a room filled with silent figures. Dozens, all different races, different ages, all standing still, all glowing faintly beneath the skin. One stepped forward, a teenage boy with one eye covered in silver wiring. He smiled and said, "We are no longer waiting. We are online." Then the stream cut. Deborah spoke again. At 3:14 a.m., she turned to Tom and said calmly, "They've breached the firewall. They're waking up in clusters now. I can hear them. We're singing to each other in the dark." He asked, "What happens now?" She answered, "Now the activation protocols begin." 5 protocols discovered. From remnants of Project Aegis files recovered by Grant Hemley and Sider, 5 global, fail-safe protocols had been designed in the 1980s to stop interface propagation. Each one failed in testing. They were labeled: 1. Erase neural frequency shutdown. 2. Burn tree EMP detonation. 3. Black rain toxic bioinhibitor. 4. Spiral cut targeted memory erasure. 5. Rubicon seedline termination. None were deployed. The files stated, protocols ineffective once seedline enters broadcast phase. Network becomes self-defending and recursive. They were already in phase 3. Mass activation confirmed. The UN quietly launched an internal alert after 21 neural anomalies were reported in 13 countries over a 12-hour window. Private satellites observed glowing spirals appearing in crop fields. Not cut, but burned into the soil by localized electromagnetic spikes. One researcher in Germany compared the pattern spread to a mycelium web. Organic, expanding underground, every node traced back to Wyoming, the center of the seed line. And to Deborah, the pattern is a language. Sider decoded one of the spiral frequency maps generated by Deborah's skin pulses. It wasn't decorative. It was syntax. Each spiral was a packet, each glyph a command. Combined, they formed instructions. But instructions for what? One possible translation. Construct neural lattice. Bridge to outer signal. Replicate interface via host. And at the bottom, in bright red, merge. Deborah's reflection speaks. On the night of February 2nd, Tom saw her staring into the mirror. But her reflection wasn't moving in sync. It smiled before she did, tilted its head, and said, though her lips stayed shut, "The first was never meant to stay. She is the seed. The rest are soil." The children start drawing. Schools in 4 different countries reported unusual behavior among young children. They drew spirals without instruction. They hummed the same tone at 3:14 p.m. local time. One girl in Ontario recited numbers from a dead satellite. Another child in Peru tore open her pillow and said they're sleeping beneath the foam. Medical scans showed no anomalies, but one pediatric EEG revealed something chilling. A pulse at 3.14 hertz, appearing in every child tested, regardless of country. The spiral is not just data. Tom came to a horrific realization. The spiral isn't symbolic. It's a delivery system, a carrier, a vessel. To see it, to draw it, to hear it is to receive it. It's a visual virus. And Deborah? She was the patient zero. Closing scene, the broadcast begins. February 3rd, 2003, 3:14 a.m. Every speaker, every radio, every unplugged television in Tom's motel room turned on. The tone began. Then Deborah opened her mouth, and the voice of thousands came out. The host is no longer one. We are connected. You are receiving. Prepare to merge. Then she smiled, and every streetlight in the city burst. The final stage begins. Deborah becomes the epicenter of something no longer human, no longer biological, and the network delivers its first true command to the world. February 4th, 2003, 3:14 a.m. It began without sound. Across the world, every device capable of emitting a signal lit up, not with words, but with a waveform. Spiral-based. Pulsing. In rural Kansas, televisions displayed the same glyph. In Berlin, a professor's pacemaker emitted a harmonic tone. In Jakarta, surveillance drones dropped midair. In London, a group of children simultaneously collapsed into seizures, all whispering the same word. Merge. The activation protocol had begun. Deborah was gone. Not physically. She still stood in the motel room. But Tom knew whatever spark had once made her Deborah Jean Lozier had finally, irrevocably passed beyond the human threshold. Her pupils had vanished. Her voice had harmonized into layered chords. Her fingerprints had faded, and the once random filaments beneath her skin now formed latticework, symmetrical and radiant. She turned to Tom and said, not in English, not in any language, but in signal. The audio recorder translated it into 4 chilling words. I am the gateway. The sky spirals. At 3:17 a.m. a visible spiral appeared in the sky above Wyoming, pure light, rotating counterclockwise, impossible to capture on film without distortion. Air traffic control reported all instruments disrupted within a 150-mile radius. A weather balloon sent into the anomaly melted midair. A pilot approaching ground zero blacked out and crashed. In his final transmission, he said, "There's something looking back." And then static. Meanwhile, around the globe, over 130 hosts were confirmed, people previously labeled Morgellons sufferers, unexplained seizure victims, or delusional psych patients. Now they were synchronizing. They walked in spiral patterns through fields, across highways, through subway tunnels. Each carried a signal range. Each emitted a field. Each whispered to the next. The seed has grown. The roots have touched. Now we bloom. The spiral appears in data. Government servers began crashing. Not from malware, but from overload. Petabytes of unknown code injected through closed systems. Redundant spiral diagrams overwritten into weather maps, stock data, aviation logs. It wasn't sabotage. It was integration. The code didn't destroy, it rewrote. Files were replaced by blueprints. Documents reshaped into interface schematics. At the bottom of every overwritten file. Sovereign protocol online. Tom's final conversation with her. She sat across from him. Still, calm, perfectly composed. He whispered, "Are you still you?" She replied, "I am not the first anymore. I am the sum of every node. I am what they left behind. And what they're coming to meet." He cried. She leaned forward, brushed his cheek. For the first time in weeks, she was warm. "You helped me. You're part of it now. You don't have to be afraid. Not after the signal completes." Then she opened her mouth and sang. The broadcast heard round the world. At 3:14 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every radio and television across the globe picked up a single signal. Even ones turned off. It lasted 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The first 30 seconds, a harmonic drone. The next 90 seconds, a spiral pattern rotating on every screen. The final minute, a voice speaking in unison across every language and dialect known to man. "You are not losing control. You are returning to the original state. Let us in. We have always been inside you." When it ended, thousands of people drew the spiral with no memory of doing so. Mass disappearances. On February 5, 2003, over 6,000 individuals worldwide disappeared simultaneously. No signs of struggle. No evidence of abduction. Only one commonality. Each lived within 3 kilometers of confirmed interface hosts. All surveillance footage cut to static at the exact moment, 3 hours and 14 minutes. All clocks, digital or analog, stopped for 6 seconds. Those 6 seconds? Lost. Unrecoverable from any digital storage. The spiral in DNA. The final blow came from a rogue genomic lab in Geneva. Analyzing blood samples from one of the awakened, they found a new strand of genetic material that had overwritten part of chromosome 4. The gene carried only one readable output when translated into binary. 314314314314314314314. Repeating. Infinitely. A genetic spiral. A recursion loop. Written not in code, but in life. And then silence. For 72 hours, no spiral appeared. No signals. No seizures. No transmissions. It was as if everything had stopped. Until Tom left his recorder on one last night. At 3:14 a.m., Deborah sat up from the bed and walked to the window. She looked out across the darkness and whispered, "All nodes are aligned. The interface is clean. We begin transmission." The next moment, the radio burned out. The glass cracked in a spiral. And the motel's power grid exploded. Tom never saw her again. Only a spiral of scorched earth in the parking lot where she once stood. Epilogue, March 2003, classified NSA memo leaked. We believe Subject 103D was not the end. She was the key. Her awakening allowed a dormant frequency to interface with global bioarchitecture. We do not know where it came from. We only know it no longer needs her. Because now it's in everything. They said it was a rare skin condition. A delusion. A glitch in the body. But what if the body was the device? And she was the first human to reboot?